Hello everybody, welcome back to another Woodworking Wisdom. Today we're looking at top tips for pen turners. So any of you turners out there, they should find some really helpful information in this one. We're not actually going to turn a full pen, but we're going to look at the process. We're going to start off with a bit of prep, and in that I mean the drilling and the gluing. So we're going to look at a couple of different ways to do things, and really ways to give you the best results from your for your pen turning. Now I've got my lathe all set up. I have my SK114 here with the pen turning jaws, or the pen jaws on the chuck. In the tailstock I've got a keyless chuck, or a Jacob's chuck. So that's the 13mm keyless chuck that we do. A really good bit of kit if you're into drilling, or if you've got lots of different projects you want to hold on the lathe. It's an invaluable bit of kit, that. Now the way we're going to drill this, all the pen kits come with a brass tube in the middle. So when you get your kit, you get your little bag of bits, and in there is your little brass tube. Okay, and this one's really important. This is going to dictate the size of the drill bit you're using. Okay, so this drill bit is 27/64, exactly the same diameter as our brass tube there. So I've got my right drill bit, and then all we need is our pen blank. We've got a nice bit of Cocoa Bolo here. Usually it's got this dark material with a really strong grain pattern. This is mostly the sapwood, but hopefully we've got quite a chunky pen. We might get some of that, a little splash of colour from the heartwood there. So into the chuck. Okay, each of these corners on our square is going to sit in the little recesses or apertures in the jaw, and that actually, when you kind of grip onto that gives it 8 points of contact right the way along this length. So we've got quite a long jaw on this one. Usually, if I'm not using one of these pen drill bits, I would put a little center hole in there. So if you've got a kind of a more traditional drill bit, you're using them, bring your tailstock in and just put a little mark in there with the with your skew. Okay, so make sure your drill bit's not in the way, but you want to just put a little lead in right on that center point with your skew. So these pen drill bits are really good. They are like a lip and spur type drill bit. So they have a little point on the front there, and then almost like a flat face. So when you're drilling with a drill bit like this, you get really nice kind of the bottom clearance, or the bottom face of the hole is going to be really clean. Now we're not going to drill all the way through this blank. We're only drilling the depth of our brass tube. So we've got our tube here, and I'm just going to bring that away just a little bit from the cutting edge, and we can mark off this area. And I think I'm just going to do that with a bit of masking tape. So just grab a bit of tape, offer your brass tube, and just bring it back a couple of mil away from the cutting edge there, and just mark that one off. So now we know the depth we can go in with our drill bit, and we know we're going to drill down into our blank the full length of our brass tube. Okay, so lathe speed right down to 0. I'm going to turn the lathe on and then bring that up somewhere between 800 and 1000 RPM. Okay, so I've got that on about 1000 RPM. Just have a little play with your tailstock. Make sure that this is held on that taper, so our drill chuck is held in the taper on the tailstock there, and just bring it up till you feel that kind of bite point where it's going to auto eject, and just advance it a little bit. Okay, then we can bring our drill piece or drill bit right up to, and we can lock off on our tailstock. That means we can bring this drill bit right the way back without auto ejecting, and our drill chuck is still nicely safely held. So that's it really. We're going to start drilling. So grab a hold of the drill chuck itself. And you can see that drill bit's really nice and stable. It hasn't got a wobble on. I can't feel any vibration coming up through my hand. And all of this material is still coming out of the pen blank. So I'm happy that we can keep drilling. We've got those steep flutes on this type of pen blank. Just coming out of the cut there, and it might screech a little. You know, they've got the friction of the blank just moving across those little cutters on the drill bit. What you don't want to do, like in long hole boring, is put any kind of oil or wax on that, because that's going to create an interface, and the glue won't then grab onto the timber in a bit. Okay, so I've brought it right the way back. We're not quite at our depth yet. So we need to just slide our tailstock along. So we're going to knock that off. Oh, wrong way. And we're just going to bring that up through. And just push that drill bit in. Can we go to a different camera, please, there? Okay, so that's the drilling done. Okay, I'm going to turn that machine off. We've come right the way up to our piece of tape there, and let's drag that right the way back. For extra safety, if you think you may foul on the back of this one, remove that drill bit, and let's just do that anyway. Remember, this could be hot, so just be careful we're not touching it on that end. Let's pop that to one side on the bench, and then we can retrieve our blank. So there we go. We've got a really nice clean kind of entry hole on that one, and we haven't drilled right the way through. Okay, you can see how clean that cut is just down in that hole. Now let's get our tube again, because we need to cut this to size. So we're going to move over to the bandsaw. And we want to cut this back end off. Now what I've done on the bandsaw here is just use a bit of ply. Okay, this is nice and square, so it will keep square against our fence here. And then if we hold our piece of timber to our bit of ply, everything's going to travel forward nice and safely. Also, it means we don't need to put our hand so close to the blank. Okay, so we're keeping our hands away from that that blade, and giving ourselves something that's going to help us just push this through at a nice 90 degrees. So, offering the tube up to our piece of ply, and I'm giving myself just a couple of millimeters, and just marking off where the end of that blank is. Of course you could drill these right the way through, but what sometimes happens is when the drill bit travels down to the the back end, or say we were drilling right the way through, it sometimes kind of explodes out of this back end and you get that breakout. By using this method, it's going to really reduce any kind of breakout you got. So you can see just lining up the back end of the blank there to to the measurement from the blade with the brass tube, and then I can hold this all nice and safe without going anywhere near that blade. is then, so not pushing anything through, I'm just going to double check that that's right. So I hadn't locked the fence off there. Again, give myself a couple of millimetres gap there. Lock the fence off, and then we can align our blank to our piece of ply. And we can just slide along here. Just allow the bandsaw to stop, and we can see here where we've cut right the way through. And we've got the tiniest bit of breakout where the bandsaw has kind of travelled this way and just pushed off those fibres, but that's a really nice clean way of cutting these blanks. And it's important to see that this is just a little kind of push over from where the teeth have just passed this void, and they've just curled off a tiny little bit of that breakout, but certainly not the kind of breakout you get when the drill bit travels out and pops out this back end. Sometimes you get bigger chips on the inside there. Okay, so just testing my tube, and we've got just a little bit of overhang here, which is great, and that's what we want. When we glue our pen blank, our pen tube in, that's going to be a perfect fit, and we've got hardly any cleanup to do. Okay, so that's the first top tip, is we can drill our blank on the lathe, measure the distance of that tube and only drill in that distance, and then we can cut off any little remaining bits at the end. And you can see how close we've got that. You can just see the little spur of the drill bit has engaged on that face there. Okay, good. Okay, so that's a bit of drilling on the lathe. We're going to go across to the pillar drill now and show you an alternative way of drilling these. Okay, so across to the pillar drill. So we've got a little bit of setting up to do. What we need to do is work out how far we're going to come down with the quill, or the actual kind of drill head of the drill. We need to set our drill bit to just sitting just above our blank. We don't need this bit of tape anymore, so that can come off. We can load our drill bit into the drill chuck. And just give that a little tighten up. We need to make sure that our pen centering vise is going to clear the drill bit. And also in the bottom of here, let's see if I can just retrieve it. I've got just a little square of timber. Quite tricky, it's a snug fit, but we've got a little square of timber that goes in the bottom of the centering vise, and that's just to space the blank away from the bottom of the drill, because we don't want to drill into the aluminium base of this one. So that can go in underneath there. You have to close the jaw to be able to fit it in, and that's also going to help support the cut. So when we come right the way through this blank, it's got that little packer underneath that we don't have to drill into our vise. When closing this centering vise, use an open palm. We don't want to trap our fingers in under here. Okay, it's really important that we don't trap our fingers there. You could make a little mark for centre. Sometimes a diagonal from corner to corner. I tend to just eyeball them now and just pop a little spot as close to centre as possible. And of course we've got a fairly sizable bit of timber there. If we do come off centre a little bit, it's not going to really matter too much, because once we get turning, everything will set itself right. Now let's get our depth correct on the drill. So we may need to raise the table up a bit, but what I'm doing first is just to bring these little lock nuts up on the side of the pillar drill here, and that's going to set our depth. And just raise the table, so we've got a little lock on the back there. I'm going to extend the quill out as far as it will go, and then just bring the table up until it's just about to touch, but not touching. Like I say, we don't want to drill into our clamp if we can help it. So we can still fit our blank in underneath. Be careful of these jaws here. Okay, and that's ready for drilling. Okay, so I'm just centering up the vise, just having a quick, just eyeballing that, make sure that we're hitting that center mark. That just double check that we're not going to drill into our vise, our centering vise, and then bring that center point right up to that little spur on the drill bit. And that's why these are really good for kind of lining these up. That little spur is really kind of hits the center mark. Good. Sometimes when I put a clamp on things, it's worth just double checking that it hasn't moved as you kind of grip that clamp, and we're good to go. Again, I'm going to bring a finger of thumb across just to support the vise. And the kind of parabolic flute on this type of drill bit really helps to bring that swarf out. But do back off the cut. Sometimes with the plastics and the polyesters, you can get a little bit of a kind of a bit where it binds in the flute, and sometimes that can heat up and melt and stick to the drill bit. So these timber ones we're fine with, but especially the acrylics and polyesters, make sure that you back off the cut and allow that waste to escape. Just come it back a little bit, and remember we can come right the way down until we hit our those lock nuts, and I can see a little shaving of that timber that was underneath. That it was a white piece of tulip, that little packer, and then our Coca-Cola is definitely a darker colour. So I'm just seeing a little flash of colour from our base plate or our little support bit, and I'm not sure if that's coming up on camera there, but we've got a really clean exit from our drilling. So really no kind of revisiting and having to kind of dress that at all. And again, let's see if we can just get out our little packer from underneath, and you can see where we've just drilled into that and where we've got that nice clean circle cut, and that is what supported this one from underneath. So virtually no breakout. So we're done with the drilling. Hopefully there's a couple of little tips in there that you might be able to use and apply to what you do at home. Next we're going to look at gluing. Okay, so next stage is to glue our tubes inside our blanks. We've drilled our blanks, we've got some good results from our drilling. Now we want to glue them in, and there's a couple of glues that I want to really kind of sing their praises. This first one is the Z-POXY. This is the 30-minute. It does come with a 5-minute version as well, and that's the kind of open time that you've got to kind of play with the material. So this one, the 30-minute, I prefer because usually we do runs of pens. So if you're doing, say, 5, 6, 7, 8 pens, you know, you've got that open time. You can mix up a bigger batch and just, you know, it'll stay open for all of your projects. So Z-POXY, and this is the 30-minute one. The other one, and I'm not such a big fan, but I know Jason likes this one. This is the polyurethane liquid glue. This is a kind of expanding glue, so if you did have any kind of mishaps with your drilling, maybe you've got a couple of little voids that need filling, this one can work really well. And both of these glues have a really good kind of shock absorbency. So that means when we're turning, we're introducing a lot of vibration through the material that it's not going to shatter. Potentially some of the super glues and stuff sometimes shatter because they're so hard. These have got a little bit of play and a little bit of give. So this Z-POXY comes in 2 parts. We have the resin and the hardener. I like to put the resin down on first, and we'll give ourselves, you know, don't squeeze out too much, but we don't want to be too stingy with it either. Equal parts of each. And I've just got an old board here. You can see some old dry PVA on there, just as a little mixing board. So we want to give that a really good mix. Make sure that those 2 parts have mixed together, otherwise it just doesn't set. Sometimes these epoxy, especially these 2-part epoxies, they've got a really good shelf life. Sometimes they do crystallize a little bit, but just pop the bottles in a mug of hot warm water, and that will kind of break down that crystallization. So just grabbing the tube and rolling it in the glue, and not being, like we said before, we want a nice decent coating of glue on there. Alright, the excess will come off almost as like a squeegee as we pop it into our pen blank. So be careful not to get glue in the ends there. I've heard people like to put potato in there to stop the glue running in. I've never really had much of a problem with excess glue going inside the barrel, but of course if you're finding you're getting that problem, something like a bit of potato, something like that will really help. Now I'm rotating this as I push it in to get a good coverage. We've got a bit of a reservoir of glue up on that top bit there. Sometimes I'll drag it up the blank if we're going to get a drip or anything like that, and then just push it in that last little bit. Any excess, again, let's just wipe off that bit of glue there. I'm going to drag that around and pop that back with our glue. Usually if I'm doing another pen of the same type, I'll use this next brass tube to get that excess off, but we're going to use a different glue for that one. So that's that. Again, just remove any excess material. We're going to trim these later, and you know, the less glue around there the better really. But that's you know, half an hour and we can trim that, and that'll be ready for turning. So polyurethane, I'm finding a new patch on my board here. I don't want the glues to mix really, and that should just pull off. And this stuff is activated with moisture, so it's kind of like an expanding glue really. It kind of foams up like the stuff you get at at home, the DIY, the foam expanding glue. This stuff reacts with moisture, and goes off. So we've got some a good splodge of glue on there, a good amount on there. And what I'm going to do, you can see there's just not much on this end bit. When we start pushing that down through and it's dragging the glue in, I'm just going to reverse back out a little, and then whatever glue was left on the inside there would have got that first little bit. And again, rotate the tube as we put it down into this blank, and get yourself something like a little prod that you can just push that last bit in and remove the excess. Like I say, this expanding glue is really give you a really good hold. You may come back to this and find it's kind of foamed out the end a little, but we'll check that when we come back to turn. Okay, so there we go, a little bit of gluing. I'm going to lay them down flat. Just make sure that we've got no kind of gluey bits that are coming around the corner, that we can lay our blanks down and they're not going to stick to our table. Okay, and that's about it really for gluing. So in a moment we are going to, once these have dried, we can trim them back. We may even use a different set of blanks so we can get straight to it. Okay, so we've had a good look at gluing. Our next job is to trim these pens. So remember, we cut them just slightly oversized on the bandsaw, and if we have a little look on here, let's bring it back. The brass tube doesn't quite come up to the end. You can just see a little bit of material. That's where we cut them extra long in case we had any breakout during that drilling process. You can see the glues have gone off, and remember we use two different types of glue. Our kind of favorites in here, we've got the Z-POXY on this one. It's given us that kind of really shiny finish, and then we use the polyurethane, the expanding glue, and you can see again where that that glue's kind of expanded and foamed out of the end. So we've got a little bit of excess on there that we need to trim off as well. But yeah, we need to just remove this last couple of millimeters, and we are going to do that on a disc sander. Okay, so this is our next tip. You'll be familiar with these barrel trimmers. Oops, drop that one. You'll be familiar with the barrel trimmer. So that would just go in a drill, and you know, it fits the tube in here, and then that will just rotate and trim off that excess. Okay, so if you're into pens, you should be aware of the barrel trimmers. Really good little tools, but when we're doing pens, we quite often do them in large sets, and this can be a nice little time saver. So we've got our C jaws on the lathe. Okay, we've got our faceplate ring, the C faceplate ring, and on that we've mounted a bit of ply and then one of our Velcro back sanding discs. And if you need any kind of advice on how to put that together, check out some of Colwyn's videos. He uses this a lot. It's a real favourite of ours. Just find the chuck key here, and we're going to expand those jaws into that C faceplate ring. Okay, good. Again, we've got our little table, and what we need to create is a little stop. We're coming out quite close to our sanding disc. We don't want too much of an overhang there. Just spin it round, make sure we're not fouling on anything. I've got an engineer's square, and I'm going to push that up against the face of the sanding disc. Then we can get our bit of ply. This is the bit of ply that we were using earlier on the bandsaw. Just making sure we've got a nice kind of square edge to this. So let's switch this around so our squares that side, and we're going to put our piece of ply there. And I'm just going to grab onto that using one of these clamps. We need to come this way just a touch. Make sure we're keeping things square. And that needs to be well gripped. We don't want that shifting. And I think we're touching on there, so let's just have a little jiggle round. We need to make sure we're keeping square but not touching on, and that looks great. So now we've given ourselves almost like a little fence. I'm going to bring in extraction. So I've brought my extraction hose in. We're going to produce a little bit of, we're using an abrasive, so we're sanding. We want to get rid of that airborne dust with the extractor. And now you can see here we've got this fence which we've set square to our sanding face here, our sanding pad. Good. So I'm going to turn the lathe on. The speed's gone right down to 0. And we're just going to get that going. Let's remove that for a moment. Pop the extractor on. Going to bring the speed up. I'm on just about 800 RPM there. And what we're looking to do is sand this face and just reveal that brass tube in underneath. And I'm not sure if that's picking up on camera. Maybe we'll try on this one. But we've got a really nice shiny face to the brass now, taking off that top oxidized layer, and we've got a really nice square to the blank face on that blank. So just coming away from my fence, using a little bit more of the pad, because we've still got a bit of material to take off of here, so we can use a little bit more of the pad, trying to keep it nice and at that 90 degrees. Checking to see where my brass tube is, and we're nearly there, so then I can hold it up to our fence and just take that last little bit. And I'm just taking it nice and easy as we get closer to that brass tube. And there we are, we've exposed that little that shiny end on the brass. Okay, so the next one. Again, just taking it until we see that shiny brass. Sometimes I'll just rotate and do that on a couple of faces. And then again, using that fence on that last little bit as we get closer to our brass tube. Nearly there. There we go. So all trimmed, and we've got a nice flat face across the off the surface there. Now, remember we said earlier, sometimes the glue creeps into the barrel. We've got a little bit of that polyurethane in there. what I tend to do, let's pop the extractor off. What I tend to do is get something like a square-sided bradawl and put that point nice and deep in that hole so we're not going to kind of pop out, and just use one of the corners of the bradawl to scrape off that glue, and there we go, all gone. Okay, so nice and simple, square bradawl. Okay, so we have glued and trimmed our blank. This is ready now to go on the mandrel. So let's get our mandrel here. This is the compression mandrel. It's got that hollow live center which goes in the tailstock. So we'll do that. We kind of throw it up in there. We're going to get rid of some of these standard bushings. And on this pen, this is a Venetian pen, quite a chunky pen. It's got these bigger bushings. So we're getting one on there, on with our blank, and on with the other bushing. And you can see that those bushings are seating really well, right up close to that blank. There's no kind of gaps or steps or anything like that. No funny angle where we potentially could have trimmed at the wrong angle. So we're good there to go. And that's how the mandrel should go. It should just slip straight in to the hollow center here. We lock off our tailstock and put a little bit of compression onto the blank. Okay, so winding our tailstock, that's pushing out our the quill here, and then it's sandwiching between our two the bushings and the blank. Okay, so you can use whatever tool you like to rough this down, or I tend to use a roughing gouge. I know the guys like to use the bowl gouges. I just find it nice and easy with the roughing gouge. Make sure it's sharp. You want to we want to try and produce a good finish using this tool, and that's going to help us when it comes to sanding and finishing this piece. So I'm going to pop the extractor on. We've got some little chips that are going to be coming off here, and potentially a little bit of airborne dust. So extractor's going on. Just bring the extraction hose in a little. Get that nice and close so it's doing its job. Okay. So, as for speed, a nice little project like this, which is held really well on the mandrel, we can take our speed up. I'm around just over the 2000 RPM mark there. Tool rest needs to be just below center, so I'm just going to tweak that. Let's turn our lathe off. Just going to drop this a smidge, and of course just make sure we're not going to foul on anything. So we're good to go. With the roughing, I like to put a thumb on top here, and that's going to act as a little chip deflector. So those chips aren't coming up and hitting me in the face, they are hitting my thumb and deflecting. So we can just take this back and forth. I'm using the tool rest as a guide to keep everything nice and straight. Not changing the projection of the roughing gouge over the tool rest much, so that keeps everything straight. Like I say, use the tool rest as a guide. And we're not going for a great finish yet. Just going to tweak my tension a little, because you saw it stop there. And we're going for a kind of a cigar shape on this pen. So we'll take it down straight. Our overhang's coming a little bit too much, so let's bring our tool rest in. And you can see a little bit of a rough finish there, where we travel quite quickly across the surface. We've got that lovely two-tone of of this Coca-Cola. So I'm just going to tidy up this top surface now. We're going to finish the shape, so we're going to start to bring in this down to our bushing by just taking a number of little cuts, and where I'm looking is the top line. I'm not looking where the tool is touching the material, I'm looking at that top line there. And perhaps if we come to this camera, I'm looking for the shape of the pen. I'm looking along here. It's kind of silhouette, if you like, not actually where the tool is contacting, and that's giving me a much better idea of the shape that we're producing. Each time we take a pass, I can see that line changing, and we're coming down to our kind of rough shape on our pen. Leaving myself a couple of millimeters away from the bushing still at the moment. We want that nice even kind of balance. And take just a smidge more out of the middle. And I'm going to stop the lathe and have a peek. If possible, I want to keep this little flash of colour. Make a nice interesting a nice interesting feature on the pen, and we could even put the clip of the pen across that, make everything really nice. So every now and then, if you've got a feature that you want to keep, make sure that you're not going to turn everything off. So I don't want to take much more from that diameter there along this part of the body. I want to keep that little feature in. So I'm just concentrating on the overall shape. Have a little tickle across there just to bring the shape right. And we're good. We're just about to reach our bushings. We're very close. We've still got our lovely little flash of colour there. Good. So now we're going to do a finishing cut. There's a couple of ways I like to do this. First, I'm going to show you with the roughing gouge. So we are going to do a bevel rubbing cut. Okay, that means we can touch onto the workpiece. Well, that's not cutting anything. It's literally we're just rubbing on the bevel of the tool. That's touching onto our project, and then see, we just lift the handle until we get that little bit of dust, and that's going to be the best kind of finish that you'll get off of this tool by just having that tiny little cut, this bevel rubbing action. It's going to give us a really nice finish, and I can see the kind of reflective quality of the timber just kind of come up to a slight shine. And that's a bevel rubbing cut, and I would generally stick with this chisel or gouge and take that down using that bevel rubbing cut. If you've got a little area you're a little bit worried about, you don't want to get too close with the roughing gouge, we can always do a little bit of scraping. So let's bring the tool rest up a touch. That wants to be pretty much on center. And now we've got our skew. We can just really gently rock that back and forth. So we're keeping our nice shape. If you go in just straight in like that, you're going to create a flat. So I'm just kind of rocking my body side to side and using that face of the skew as a pivot point. you can turn the lathe off, have a little feel, and we're really close down onto our bushing there. That's looking great. Tiny little tickle left. Good. And we can do the same the other side. You could use the heel just to roll that in. Again, if you're looking for that kind of super precision, get the real tip of that skew and just gently take that right down to the bushing. And we're not pushing hard with this. The lathe's doing all the work, that rotary action of the lathe. We're really just skimming the surface. Good. And we've got a pretty good finish on that. We can see we've got ever such slight kind of vibration or a slight buffing. I think that's come off the skew here. So I'm just going to go in again with my roughing gouge. We've come right down to our bushings with that skew, and I'm just going to do that little finishing cut just over the top again with that bevel rubbing. Just drag that tool right the way across the surface. Hardly taking any material now. But I'd say that's ready for sanding. Although we've got that kind of those little lines running across there, they're not going deep. They are really just on the surface, and what we're seeing is a kind of burnished part, and then something that's just not quite as burnished. So a little bit of sanding, that's going to knock that straight back. And we've got ourselves a really nice and accurate pen. We've got no step here where the bushing meets the pen blank, and that's what you're looking for. That really smooth transition from the bushing onto the pen. So we're not feeling any shoulder on there. Because when you come to put the pen together, these bushings represent the components of the pen, and any shoulder that you feel here, you will feel on the finished piece. Okay, so they need to be perfectly smooth with those. That's ready for sanding. Okay, and I would take that through the grits. Usually start a little bit higher than you would with most products. I usually start around about the kind of 240 and then 400, 600, or the 320 in between. You could use the micro mesh if you wanted to get really high polish on this. Things like friction polish will work really nice on the timber. That will bring that dark material out really well. But there's lots of different finishes. Lots of people use different things. A CA finish can be a nice long-lasting one, but something to go out and have a look at. That's about it for our top tips for pens. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you found something in there that you've not seen before, or something that's going to help you in your kind of pen turning journey. So that's it. We'll see you again soon for more woodworking wisdom. If you're enjoying these videos and all this free content, please hit the like and subscribe buttons, and we'll see you again soon.